The show ran for just 2 seasons, but thanks to reruns, it has managed to find a cult audience. Melody Patterson stood out as the only woman in the cast, helping create F Troop havoc along with Ken Berry, Larry Storch, and Forrest Tucker.
F Troop was quietly canceled after just 65 episodes, and its legacy is far stranger than most viewers realize. F Troop was a satirical Western sitcom set in the 1960s, built on chaotic soldiers, clever tribal schemes, and jokes that made it one of the most unusual comedies of its time. Despite steady ratings and later success in syndication, the story behind its production and cancellation is far less well known than the show itself. So why did F Troop really end so abruptly? And what strange facts about its production have been hidden for decades? Join us as we reveal 15 things about F Troop that will completely change how you see the show. Number 15. The show's creator credit was wrong for years. The opening credits of every episode of F Troop told viewers that the show was created by Richard Bluell. That credit ran for the entire 2-season run of the show and was accepted without question by the audience and the industry. The only problem was that it turned out to be inaccurate. After the show had finished its run, a final arbitration conducted by the Writers Guild of America determined that the actual creators of F Troop were 3 writers named Seaman Jacobs, Ed James, and Jim Barnett. The original story that became the first episode was theirs, and the arbitration decided that the creation credit belonged to them rather than to Bluell. The credit for the episodes themselves was never corrected. The DVDs that eventually brought the series to a new generation still carry the original credits in the episodes themselves, meaning that anyone watching F Troop today is looking at an attribution that was officially ruled wrong before the show had even been fully processed by television history. It is the kind of detail that feels entirely appropriate for a show about an army outpost where nobody is who they are supposed to be, and everything operates slightly differently from how it appears on the surface. And speaking of things not being what they appear to be, the next fact is about someone who was hiding something considerably more personal than a writing credit, and she hid it for the entire run of the series. Number 14. One writer wrote nearly half the show entirely by himself. F Troop ran for 65 episodes across 2 seasons. Of those 65 episodes, a single writer named Arthur Julian wrote 29 of them entirely on his own. That is nearly half the entire series produced by one person sitting at one typewriter. The writers of the show included veterans from some of the most celebrated comedies in television history, including people who had written for The Dick Van Dyke Show and Green Acres. The writing staff as a group produced some of the most densely packed joke-per-minute comedy that American network television had seen up to that point in its history. And yet nearly half of the episodes that made people laugh hardest and remember the show most fondly came from one man who apparently had an inexhaustible supply of ideas for what could go wrong at Fort Courage. Arthur Julian did not just write for F Troop. He also appeared in one of his own episodes, playing an undertaker in the episode he wrote called Survival of the Fittest, which is the kind of creative involvement that suggests he genuinely loved the world he was building week after week. If the writing staff behind the show was this unusual, wait until you find out the truth about the 2 people who received the creation credit they did not earn, and the tribe name that almost got the whole show in trouble with network censors. Number 13. The tribe name was a dirty joke that almost got banned. The Native American tribe at the center of F Troop's comedy was called the Hekawi. The show explained how the tribe got its name in an episode where Chief Wild Eagle told the story. The tribe had been moving west because, as Wild Eagle put it, the Pilgrims had ruined the neighborhood. They traveled over mountains and wild streams until one day the whole tribe fell off a cliff. A medicine man looked around and said to his ancestor, "Where the heck are we?" And that was how they became the Hekawi. The joke lands as a family-friendly play on words and a self-contained piece of slapstick history, which is exactly what it was meant to be. What most viewers at home never knew was that the original name the writers proposed for the tribe was not the Hekawi. It was the fugawe, as in, where the fugawe, a pun on a phrase that contained a considerably stronger word than heck. The network censors caught it immediately and rejected the name entirely. The writers went back and came up with the hakawi, which delivered essentially the same joke with a softer landing, and the censors accepted it. The show aired, the name stuck, and generations of viewers laughed at the origin story without ever knowing that the first version of the joke was too much for ABC to put on the air. Moving on, the next fact involves a 15-year-old who fooled an entire production into thinking she was old enough to be there. Number 12. Wrangler Jane was played by a teenager who lied about her age. Wrangler. Jane, the tough-shooting, hard-riding romantic interest who spent 2 seasons trying to get Captain Parmenter to marry her, was one of the most memorable characters in the show. She was played by Melody Patterson, who brought genuine physicality and comic confidence to the role, making her seem every bit the equal of the much more experienced actors around her. What she was not, and what nobody on the production knew when they hired her, was old enough to be there. Patterson was 15 years old when she auditioned for the role. She and her mother did not disclose her real age, reportedly using a fake birth certificate to support the claim that she was old enough to work adult hours on a professional production. She was 16 when filming for the first season actually began. When the producers discovered the truth, they were troubled by it. But Patterson's maturity and professionalism on set were so evident that they decided to keep her in the role rather than recast. If a teenager lying her way onto a major network show seems remarkable, the next fact involves a man who did the exact opposite. Let's find out what he did. Number 11. The Town Drunk was a 65-year-old stuntman pretending to be young. In the town of Fort Courage, one recurring character was Old Charlie, the town drunk. His regular bit involved being thrown out of the saloon doors or through the window, bouncing off a support post, falling forward over a hitching rail, spinning around, and landing flat on his back or face. Every time this happened, the audience laughed. The physical comedy was perfect, and every viewer assumed they were watching a young stuntman in heavy old man makeup performing an impressive series of controlled falls. Harvey Parry was 65 years old when he played Charlie, and he had been working as a professional stuntman for nearly 45 years at that point. The character of Old Charlie was specifically created for Parry so the production could showcase what a man of his experience could still do physically on camera. The next fact on our list involves the real-life military career of one of the stars, which turned out to be almost more relevant to his F Troop character than the writers could have planned. Let's check that out. Number 10. Forrest Tucker's real identity. Sergeant Morgan O'Rourke is the scheming, money-hungry con-man heart of F Troop. He is, in the words of Corporal Agarn, the best at shifty, sneaky double-dealing that anyone has ever seen. The actor who played him, Forrest Tucker, had actually served in the United States Cavalry before World War II. This means the man playing a scheming cavalry sergeant had genuinely been a cavalry soldier at an earlier point in his life. The connection goes even further, because Forrest had also played a character called O'Rourke on the long-running Western series Gunsmoke, which made him one of the very few actors in television history to have played soldiers named O'Rourke in 2 different shows, while also having actually served in the military force one of those characters was supposed to belong to. Now that you know Tucker's military background, here is something you probably do not know about the character whose name was a secret joke about 2 famous Hollywood cowboys, and who played him with a comedic commitment that made him the audience's favorite. Number 9. A hidden joke about 2 Hollywood cowboys. Larry Storch played Corporal Randolph Agarn, the somewhat dim sidekick and business partner of Sergeant O'Rourke. Randolph is loyal, enthusiastic, not always bright, and regularly the source of the show's best physical comedy. His name was known to every viewer who watched the show. What almost none of them realized was that the name was a hidden joke built from the names of 2 famous Western film stars. Randolph comes from Randolph Scott, one of the biggest cowboy actors of the 1940s and 1950s, whose career in westerns spanned decades. Agarn comes from John Agar, another Western film actor who made his name in frontier films during the same era. By combining Randolph and Agar into Randolph Agarn, the writers created a character whose very name was a quiet tribute to the genre they were enthusiastically lampooning every single week. While Larry was busy playing half the guest cast himself, another actor on the show was secretly being cast in the episode for reasons that had nothing to do with his acting talent and everything to do with his lifelong skill set. Find out who that was right after this. Number 8. The show's fake shooting squad flopped. One of the recurring jokes built into the premise of F Troop is that the soldiers at Fort Courage are genuinely the worst soldiers in the entire United States Army. This is not simply a character choice. It is a foundational principle of the show, established in the opening backstory and reinforced in every episode. These men were sent to Fort Courage specifically because the Army hoped they would all desert. The show drove this point home in an episode called The Day They Shot Agarn, in which the soldiers of the fort are formed into a firing squad. Standing only a few yards from their target, every single member of the squad fired and missed completely. Not one shot connected. This is a show that treated the incompetence of its characters not as an exaggeration for comic effect, but as an established fact of their world that the audience could count on being confirmed week after week. You now know how poorly the soldiers performed their jobs. But did you know that one of the most famous horror actors in Hollywood history showed up at Fort Courage, making things considerably more complicated? That is coming right up. Number 7. Vincent Price played a vampire in one of the most celebrated episodes. F Troop was many things. A Western parody, a military satire, a comedy about capitalism and corruption, and a showcase for some of the best physical comedians working in television in the mid-1960s. What it was not, for most of its run, was a horror show. That changed in the second season episode called V is for Vampire. In that episode, the legendary actor Vincent Price appeared as Count Sforza, a vampire who had somehow ended up near Fort Courage and was causing the kind of supernatural problems that the Army's regulations book did not have a chapter for. Vincent brought his full theatrical intensity to the role, playing it completely straight against the comedic mayhem happening around him, which is exactly the right approach and the one that makes the episode still genuinely funny to watch today. Vincent was already one of the most recognizable faces in horror cinema by the time he appeared in F Troop, with decades of Gothic films under his belt. Seeing him show up in a half-hour Western comedy and commit entirely to the bit was the kind of casting surprise the show occasionally pulled off, reminding viewers that it was capable of more than just slapstick. The episode features secret passages, a self-playing organ, and everything else you would expect from a proper vampire story, all eventually wrapped up with rational explanations in the best F Troop tradition. If Vincent Price playing a vampire on a Western comedy show sounds like the most unexpected casting in the series, you might be surprised to learn that the next fact involves a future rock star who appeared in the show before anyone outside of California had ever heard of him. Number 6. A future rock music legend appeared in the show before he was famous. The second season episode, That's Showbiz, features a rock band performing at Fort Courage under the fictional name The Bedbugs. The band was played by a real group called The Factory, a Los Angeles-based band that had not yet achieved any significant fame outside of their local scene. One of the members of The Factory was a young musician named Lowell George, who would go on to found the band Little Feat and become one of the most celebrated guitarists and songwriters of the 1970s, widely regarded as one of the most distinctive musical voices of his generation. When George and his bandmates appeared in F Troop, he was an unknown playing a fictional band in a half-hour Western comedy. When Little Feat released their first album in 1971, the journey from Fort Courage to rock music history was complete. The Factory's appearance in F Troop amounts to one of the earliest recorded television appearances by any member of what became Little Feat. making the episode a small but genuine piece of rock music history, dressed up in army costumes. If a pre-fame rock legend appearing in a Western comedy is the kind of connection that surprises you, the next fact involves a character whose entire name was a wordplay joke that ran on American network television without most of the audience catching it. Number 5. One character was named after a Beatles drummer. The show featured a recurring character, Trooper Leonard Ringo Starr, a jinxed soldier whose presence at Fort Courage brought bad luck to everyone around him. He appeared in 2 episodes and had a running mystery about where exactly his jinx had come from, with the show giving different explanations in different episodes. His name was a direct play on Ringo Starr, the drummer of the Beatles, who were at the peak of their global fame during the years F Troop was on the air. The joke in the name works on 2 levels. Ringo becomes Rongo, suggesting failure and bad luck, and Starr becomes Starr, keeping the surname identical. The character was played by Henry Gibson, who went on to become much more widely known for his work on Laugh-In later in the decade. The show was full of this kind of layered wordplay that rewarded attentive viewers without alienating anyone who missed the reference. The name Rongo Starr works perfectly well as the name of a jinxed cowboy, even if you have never heard of Ringo Starr. The joke simply becomes richer if you have. The character names were one of the cleverest elements of F Troop's writing. And speaking of clever writing, the next fact involves who was really running this show behind the scenes and how the creation credit dispute raised questions that the Writers Guild had to settle officially. Number 4. The Hekawi Indians were mostly played by Borscht Belt Jewish comedians. The Hekawi tribe was presented on F Troop as a fictional Native American people who had a passion for commerce, a gift for negotiation, and an entrepreneurial spirit that made them natural partners for Sergeant O'Rourke's money-making schemes. Their comic style was broad, their timing was sharp, and their delivery had a quality that felt somewhat different from anything else in a Western setting. There was a specific reason for that. The actors who played the members of the Hekawi tribe were primarily veteran comedians from the Borscht Belt tradition, the circuit of Jewish resort hotels in the Catskill Mountains of New York, where a generation of American comedians developed their craft in the mid-20th century. Frank DeCova, who played Chief Wild Eagle, brought a menacing physical presence that he had built through years of playing cold-hearted killers in other shows, then redirected entirely into broad comedy. Don Diamond as Crazy Cat, Wild Eagle's excitable subordinate, had a similar background in performance traditions that were entirely East Coast rather than frontier Western. The writers and producers were fully aware that they were staging something unusual. A group of Jewish comedians from New York performing Borscht Belt comedy routines while dressed as fictional Native Americans in an Old West setting. The joke was clear to anyone who recognized the performing tradition, and the show leaned into it fully, giving the Hekawi characters sharp one-liners, comic timing, and a general sophistication about money and negotiation that felt more like a Manhattan negotiation than anything you would expect from a television portrayal of frontier life. Now that you understand the comedy tradition behind the Hekawi tribe, here is the fact about why the show ended that almost nobody has the full, accurate story on. Number 3. The complicated reason F Troop was cancelled. F Troop was still performing respectably in the ratings when it was cancelled at the end of its 2nd season in 1967. It had not collapsed. It had not been abandoned by its audience. The show was working. And yet it disappeared, leaving fans confused and disappointed. The most commonly repeated explanation for the cancellation came from Forrest Tucker, who said that Warner Brothers had been sold to a new company called 7 Arts, and that the new owners considered it wasteful for an entire section of the Warner Ranch in Burbank to be occupied by a single half-hour television program. A related explanation from producer William Orr pointed to the cost of producing the show in color during the 2nd season, which significantly increased the budget compared to the 1st season's black and white production. But a comment published on a television history website from a person who identified as the son of executive producer William Orr offered a considerably more specific account. According to this account, ABC wanted to keep the show going, but the network was unwilling to pay an additional $1,000 per episode above the existing license fee to cover Forrest Tucker's salary. This meant the studio was deficit financing each episode, covering the gap between what it cost to make and what the network paid. The studio decided it was not willing to continue absorbing that deficit, even though the deficit would eventually be recovered many times over in syndication revenue. The cancellation came down to a dispute over $1,000 per episode in a television business where the long-term value of the series has since been proven by decades of continuous syndication runs. But what happened after the show ended? Number 2. Two stars created something unique after the show. When F Troop ended in 1967, Forrest Tucker and Larry Storch went their separate ways professionally for several years. Tucker continued to work steadily in television and film. Storch built a long career in voice acting and stand-up comedy on top of his television work. They remained connected as friends and colleagues. In 1975, 8 years after the cancellation of F Troop, Tucker and Storch reunited to co-star in a live-action Saturday morning children's comedy series for CBS called The Ghostbusters. The show featured the two of them as a pair of goofy, bumbling, fumbling detectives who investigated paranormal events, accompanied by their regular partner, a gorilla. It had almost nothing in common with F Troop in terms of setting or premise, but it had essentially everything in common with F Troop in terms of the specific dynamic between Tucker and Storch, which was the chemistry of a large, confident schemer and his smaller, dimmer but loyal associate, operating in completely over their heads in whatever situation they found themselves in. This is the part that causes genuine confusion for people who discover it. When Ivan Reitman produced the 1984 film Ghostbusters with Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd, the studio already held the rights to the Ghostbusters name from the 1975 Tucker-Storch series. This is why the 1984 film, which became one of the highest-grossing comedies in history, was legally required to use the slightly different spelling of Ghostbusters rather than Ghostbusters, and why the animated sequel series to the 1984 film had to be called The Real Ghostbusters to distinguish it from any possible confusion with the Tucker-Storch series. Now, the very last fact on this list is the one that changes something fundamental about how you understand the whole show. Let's check it out. Number 1. Forrest Tucker's character was running a massive payroll fraud the entire time. The central comedy engine of F Troop is the scheming of Sergeant O'Rourke, who has negotiated a secret peace treaty with the Hekawi tribe, runs an illegal saloon in town, sells Hekawi souvenirs to tourists, and generally operates Fort Courage as his personal business empire, while Captain Parmenter remains obliviously convinced that he is running a legitimate military posting. Most viewers focused on the souvenir business and the saloon as the main sources of O'Rourke's income. What the show quietly established and left in plain sight for the entire run without calling attention to it is significantly more audacious than either of those operations. The payroll records at Fort Courage showed 30 soldiers receiving pay and rations. Only 17 soldiers could actually be accounted for. According to O'Rourke's explanation whenever anyone asked, the other 13 were Indian scouts who only came to the fort at night and left before dawn, which meant nobody could verify whether they existed. The pay collected for those 13 phantom soldiers went directly into financing O'Rourke Enterprises. This means Sergeant O'Rourke was running a sustained military payroll fraud against the United States Army for the entire run of the series, collecting pay for 13 people who did not exist and using that money to fund his other illegal enterprises. He was not simply a con man with a sideline and souvenirs. He was a man who had figured out how to make the U.S. government pay him to operate his criminal operation, and who had been doing it successfully for years before Captain Parmenter ever arrived. The show placed this detail in the background, mentioned it in early episodes, and then let it sit as the invisible foundation of everything O'Rourke was building, trusting the audience to either notice it and appreciate how dark the joke actually was, or miss it and simply enjoy the souvenir business as the main story. That combination of surface-level slapstick and quietly ruthless underlying premise is exactly why F Troop was smarter than it looked, why it lasted in syndication for 50 years, and why the people who loved it most tend to love it with a genuine intensity that a simple cavalry farce would never have earned. Which of these facts about F Troop surprised you the most? Was it Melody Patterson's age, the tribe name that almost didn't make it past the censors, or the payroll fraud hiding at the center of the whole show? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.